the night the sea burned. May 26, 1941, 22:47 hours. North Atlantic, 300 miles west of Brest. The wind slices across the flight deck of HMS Ark Royal like a blade. Canvas signal flags snap violently in the darkness. Below, the Atlantic heaves in black swells, flecked with white foam that glows under dim deck lamps. The smell is salt, fuel, and cordite. A single ferry Swordfish biplane shudders against its chocks, engine coughing, propeller biting into the gale. Its fabric skin ripples. Its struts creak. It looks impossibly fragile. Ahead, somewhere beyond the horizon, the German battleship Bismarck is running for France. No announcements echo across the deck. No speeches. Just clip commands. A yellow wand signals forward. Deck crew in steel helmets lean into the wind, steadying wings. The Swordfish lurches ahead, wheels rattling over planks slick with spray. For a moment, it seems the sea will swallow it. Then it lifts. Inside the open cockpit, the pilot squints into freezing air. His observer hunches over charts soaked with mist. The wireless operator tightens his grip on the Vickers K-gun mounted behind him. They are flying into weather no sane commander would choose for battle. And toward a warship no one believes they can stop. The Bismarck is the pride of the Kriegsmarine. 50,000 tons of steel and Arrogance. 8 15-inch guns. Armor so thick it shrugs off punishment. 2 days earlier, she obliterated HMS Hood in a matter of minutes. The explosion split the British battlecruiser in two, sending over 1,400 men into the Atlantic. Only 3 survived. The Royal Navy has not recovered from the shock. Now every available ship is hunting. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, aircraft carriers. The sea is crowded with steel and fury. But the Bismarck still moves. Despite damage from earlier engagements, she steams south toward Luftwaffe cover in occupied France. If she reaches Brest, she will be nearly untouchable. On her bridge, Captain Ernst Lindemann stands rigid beneath steel beams. Admiral Gunther Lütjens watches the horizon through binoculars. They know British forces are near. They do not yet know how near. The Atlantic is chaos. Low clouds drag across wave tops. Rain lashes sideways. Visibility shrinks to miles, then yards. Perfect weather for a predator to slip away, or for something small to sneak through. Back in the Swordfish cockpit, there is no radar, no enclosed canopy, only compass, stopwatch, and instinct. The pilot flies barely above the waves to avoid detection. Spray slams into struts. The engine coughs but holds. Ahead, anti-aircraft crews aboard Bismarck scan the murk. The ship's radar operators search for contacts. They expect cruisers, perhaps destroyers. They do not expect canvas biplanes crawling through the storm. Suddenly, a dark shape looms in the mist. Massive, angular. The Bismarck emerges like a steel cliff rising from the sea. Her wake cuts white through black water. Her secondary batteries begin to turn. A siren wails. Searchlights snap on. The sky explodes. Shell bursts tear open the night around the approaching Swordfish. Tracer arcs upward in brilliant white streams. The pilot holds steady. At this speed, barely over 100 knots, every second feels suspended. The aircraft shakes as near misses hammer the air. He can see men running along Bismarck's deck, guns elevating. The torpedo hangs beneath the fuselage, dull gray against darker sea. It is a Mark 12, carrying enough explosive to cripple a destroyer. Against a battleship, it feels absurd. But absurdity has a way of bending history. The observer calls out range. Closer, closer. The Swordfish drops lower still, skimming spray. The pilot lines up along the port side. The Bismarck's great hull fills his vision. Flak bursts so close the aircraft jolts violently. Fabric tears somewhere along the wing. The wireless operator fires blindly at gun flashes. Steady. The torpedo release lever weights beneath the pilot's glove. If they miss, there is no second pass. If they hit, he pulls. The torpedo drops cleanly, splashing into the Atlantic before vanishing beneath the surface. The Swordfish veers hard, engine screaming as it climbs away through curtains of fire. Below, A white track races toward the battleship's stern. On Bismarck's bridge, an officer shouts, "Hard to port." Engines strain. The massive rudders begin to shift. But the sea is unforgiving. The torpedo strikes. A dull, concussive thud reverberates through steel. The explosion blooms beneath the stern. Water erupts. Metal screams. For a moment, nothing changes. The Bismarck continues forward, seemingly unshaken. Then the helm refuses response. The rudder jams, locked at 12 degrees to port. On the bridge, confusion turns to alarm. Engineers scramble below decks. Damage control teams descend into flooding compartments. Orders echo through steel corridors. The pride of the Kriegsmarine begins an unwilling turn. A slow, helpless circle in the Atlantic night. Above the storm, the Swordfish disappears back toward Ark Royal, battered but alive. The crew does not yet know what they have done. Behind them, Bismarck's engines push at full power, but she cannot steer. And dawn is coming. May 27th, 1941, 3:12 hours. North Atlantic. The wind has shifted. On the bridge of the Bismarck, Admiral Gunther Lütjens grips the rail as the battleship carves a slow, stubborn arc through the black Atlantic. The compass card refuses to settle. The helm answers, but the ship does not. 12 degrees to port. Fixed. Permanent. Below decks. In the steering gear compartment, the air is thick with steam and seawater. Engineers wade through knee-deep flooding. Flashlights cutting narrow cones through drifting vapor. Twisted metal blocks access to the rudder machinery. The explosion from the British torpedo has jammed the twin rudders hard over. Hydraulic lines are ruptured. Control rods bent. Men work with cutting torches in a compartment that smells of oil and salt. Every spark feels like a gamble. "Mare licked," someone shouts. They try everything. Reverse engines to counter the turn. Differential thrust from port and starboard screws. Even the desperate suggestion of sending divers overboard into freezing sea to unbolt the damaged rudder. The idea dies quickly. The Atlantic would claim them in minutes. Above, Captain Ernst Lindemann watches the horizon lighten by degrees. The gray edge of dawn creeps across the water. With it comes clarity and exposure. Radio operators tap out signals toward Berlin. Situation critical. Steering compromised. Request air cover. But France is still hundreds of miles away, and daylight belongs to the Royal Navy. To the north, HMS King George V slices through heavy swells, her bow plunging deep before rising in spray. On her bridge, Admiral John Tovey studies bearings. Radar contacts confirm it. The German battleship is circling. Trapped. A slow smile touches no one's face. There is no joy in this hunt, only grim resolve. 2 days earlier, HMS had vanished in a column of flame. The memory sits raw in every British sailor's mind. Revenge is not spoken, but it is felt. Aboard HMS Rodney, 16-inch guns rest in their turrets like coiled fists. The old battleship strains to keep formation. Engines push beyond comfortable limits. Her crew knows they are closing in on history. The Atlantic grows lighter. Low clouds break in ragged patches. Visibility stretches. On Bismarck's deck, anti-aircraft crews stand ready though no aircraft appear. Ammunition hoists clank. The ship's great turrets train outward, searching for silhouettes against the morning haze. Then they see them, 2 shapes on the horizon, British battleships. Lindemann orders the main battery to bear. The forward turrets Anton and Bruno rotate with grinding authority. Massive shells are hoisted from deep magazines, their brass casings gleaming even in dim light. The range closes. At 8:47 hours, HMS Rodney fires the first salvo. The sound is cataclysmic. 16-inch guns erupt in orange flame. Shock waves ripple across the sea. Seconds later, towering water columns crash down around Bismarck. She answers. 8 15-inch guns roar in defiance. The recoil shakes her hull. Shells streak toward the British ships in long arcs of smoke. One lands close enough to Rodney to drench her forecastle in spray. Another straddles King George V. For a moment, it feels balanced, but Bismarck cannot maneuver. Each British salvo tightens the circle. Rangefinders adjust with ruthless precision. Radar provides steady corrections. A 16-inch shell smashes into Bismarck's forward superstructure. Steel buckles. Splinters side across the bridge. Men fall. Another penetrates near turret Anton, jamming its mechanisms. The turret falls silent. Fire blossoms along the deck. Thick black smoke coils upward, mixing with low cloud. Still, Bismarck fires back. Lindemann refuses to yield. Damage reports flood the bridge. Secondary batteries knocked out. Fire control systems failing. Casualties mounting. A British shell punches through the upper works and detonates near the command position. The blast hurls bodies against bulkheads. Admiral Lutyens disappears in the chaos. When the smoke clears, he is gone. The ship continues her slow, helpless turn. British destroyers close cautiously, waiting for nightfall to launch torpedoes if necessary. But daylight may end this sooner. Rodney and King George V maintain relentless fire, their guns cycling with mechanical fury. Bismarck's return salvos grow erratic. One by one, her main guns fall silent. Turret Bruno ceases. Then Caesaraf struggles to respond. Rangefinders shattered. Communications severed. Flames consume the superstructure. Paint blisters. Ammunition cooks off in violent bursts. On the battered deck, sailors drag wounded comrades toward makeshift aid stations. Chaplains murmur prayers barely audible over the thunder of impact. Below the waterline, flooding spreads. Pumps strain. Compartments seal. The great battleship that once symbolized German naval resurgence now lists slightly to port, her once proud line scorched and twisted. At 10 o'clock hours, she can no longer fire. British shells continue to strike, smashing into an already ruined hull. Captain Lindemann remains on the bridge. Smoke surrounds him. Steel groans beneath his boots. The order to abandon ship has not yet been given, but the sea is rising to meet her. May 27, 1941, 10:18 hours. North Atlantic. The sea is no longer gray. It is red with flame and black with smoke. The Bismarck barely resembles the warship that slipped into the Atlantic days earlier. Her superstructure is gutted. Antennas hang twisted like snap bones. Rangefinders are shattered glass and steel. The once precise geometry of German naval engineering has collapsed into ruin. HMS Rodney and HMS King George V continue their bombardment at near point-blank range. Now the distance is measured in thousands of yards, not tens of thousands. Every salvo lands with surgical brutality. 16-inch shells punch through decks as if through tin. 15-inch shells from King George V follow, hammering the hull again and again. On Bismarck's bridge, Captain Ernst Lindemann stands amid wreckage. Blood streaks his uniform. Smoke burns his lungs. Communications are fractured. Reports arrive by messenger now, shouted through corridors filled with debris. Forward turrets inoperative. Flooding in compartments 14 and 15. Casualties mounting. He nods once. There is no illusion left. Below decks, Chief Engineer Gerhard Janak moves through rising water. Pumps have failed in several sections. Bulkheads groan under pressure. The list increases, slight but undeniable. 12 degrees to port has become more than a rudder angle. It is the ship's fate. Men struggle to carry the wounded up ladders slick with oil. Some refuse evacuation, choosing instead to man guns that can no longer aim. A few anti-aircraft pieces still fire sporadically, instinctively lashing out at distant shapes on the horizon. Another British shell slams into the forward hull. The explosion caves in plating. Seawater surges through the breach with violent force. Lights flicker and die. In the engine rooms, turbines still turn. Massive shafts spin, driving propellers that churn uselessly against the Atlantic. Full ahead has become meaningless. The Bismarck cannot escape geometry. She moves only in circles. At 10:31 hours, Admiral Tovey signals a shift. Ammunition aboard the British battleships is running low. Fuel reserves are tight. The engagement has stretched longer than expected. The order is given for cruisers and destroyers to close in. HMS Dorsetshire advances, her smaller guns already peppering the crippled German ship. She prepares torpedoes. Steel tubes are flooded. Warheads armed. On Bismarck's lower decks, demolition charges are being set. The scuttling order passes quietly through the surviving officers. If the ship cannot fight, she will not be captured. Men move with grim determination. Seacocks are opened, explosive charges placed near vital machinery. The pride of the Kriegsmarine will go down on German terms. Above, flames whip across the forecastle. Ammunition lockers ignite in sharp, vicious bursts. The heat is unbearable. Paint peels from bulkheads in curling strips. Lindemann looks once toward the forward guns. They are silent monuments now. He removes his cap. There is nothing left to command. At 10:36 hours, Dorsetshire fires her first torpedo. The wake slices through debris floating on the surface. Seconds later, the impact shudders through Bismarck's already broken hull. A second torpedo follows, striking amidships. The explosions are not dramatic flashes of cinema. They are deep concussive blows that resonate through bone and steel alike. The list sharpens. Seawater pours through ruptured compartments unchecked. The great battleship begins to settle by the stern. Men scramble onto the tilting deck. Some leap immediately into the Atlantic, rather than burn. Others hesitate, staring at the smoke-choked sky, as if searching for rescue that will not come. Inside, the scuttling charges detonate. Controlled blasts echo through the interior, ensuring flooding spreads beyond recovery. At 10:39 hours, the bow lifts slightly as the stern sinks deeper. Propellers rise clear the water for a brief, surreal moment, spinning in open air. Then the ship rolls, slowly at first, then decisively. The Atlantic claims her. Bismarck turns onto her port side, hull exposed, scars visible even beneath layers of smoke. Hundreds of sailors cling to railings that are now vertical ladders. Others slide into the freezing sea. At 10:40 hours, the battleship disappears beneath the surface. A roar of escaping air erupts as compartments collapse. The sea closes overhead in violent churn. Debris and oil spread outward in widening circles. Silence follows. Then the cries begin. Over 2,000 men entered the Atlantic that morning. The water temperature hovers near lethal. Survival is measured in minutes. Aboard Dorsetshire, sailors throw lines and nets. Carley floats are cast overboard. British hands reach down to pull German sailors from the water. Some are barely conscious. Others fight the sea in stunned disbelief. Then comes a new fear. A lookout shouts the word no one wants to hear. Submarine. May 27, 1941, 10:52 hours. North Atlantic. Oil spreads across the surface in thick, shimmering sheets. It coats faces, uniforms, hands clawing at floating wreckage. The sea that moments ago swallowed a battleship now carries fragments of her life. Splintered timbers, shattered lockers, scraps of canvas, a life buoy stamped with the name Bismarck. And men. Hundreds of them. They thrash in water barely above freezing. Breath leaves their lungs in violent gasps. Some scream for help. Others stare blankly, already slipping into shock. Aboard HMS Dorsetshire, sailors lean over rails, hauling survivors up with ropes and scrambling nets. Wet uniforms slap against steel decks. German voices mix with English commands. Get him clear. Another line over. One survivor collapses immediately upon reaching the deck, lips blue, eyes unfocused. A British medic kneels, wrapping him in blankets still warm from the galley ovens. Nearby, another German sailor grips the railing and vomits seawater and oil. There is no hatred in these moments, only urgency. But urgency has limits. At 11:03 hours, a lookout aboard Dorsetshire reports a periscope wake in the distance. The cry moves through the ship like electricity. Submarine bearing green 20. The Atlantic has shifted again from rescue to threat. British captains know German U-boats operate in these waters. The destruction of Bismarck will draw them like wolves. A stationary cruiser cluttered with men over the side is an easy target. Depth charge crews move to stations. Engines increase revolutions. The ship begins to turn, screws churning the oil-streaked water. Still, men remain in the sea. Captain Benjamin Martin hesitates only seconds before making the decision. Rescue must cease. The cruiser cannot linger. Lines are cut, nets hauled in. Sailors pull the last reachable survivors aboard. In the water, German sailors see the British ships begin to move away. Confusion turns to despair. Arms wave weakly. Voices crack in the cold air. Dorsetshire fires a pattern of depth charges. Explosions detonate beneath the surface. Towering plumes of water rising among the survivors. The concussions are meant to deter unseen submarines, but they add chaos to an already merciless scene. HMS Maori joins the effort briefly, hauling in a handful more before she too must withdraw. The Atlantic swallows the rest. Out of more than 2,000 men, only 110 are pulled from the sea that morning. Hours later, a German weather ship and U-boat 74 will rescue a few more, but for the majority, the North Atlantic becomes their grave. The oil slick stretches for miles. It glistens under a pale sun that now breaks through thinning clouds. The storm that shielded the Swordfish has passed. The sky is almost serene. On the deck of Dorsetshire, survivors sit in stunned silence. Some shiver uncontrollably despite blankets. Others stare at the horizon where their ship vanished. One young seaman whispers a prayer in German, voice trembling. A British sailor offers him a mug of tea. The gesture is awkward, almost hesitant. The German nods once and accepts it with shaking hands. Across the water, HMS King George V and HMS Rodney turn away. Their mission complete. Ammunition magazines are nearly exhausted. Fuel reserves run low. The hunt that began with fury ends in grim efficiency. Admiral Tovey sends a signal to the Admiralty. Bismarck sunk. In Berlin, the message will land like a physical blow. Joseph Goebbels will struggle to frame the loss as anything but catastrophe. Adolf Hitler, who once dreamed of challenging British sea power with modern battleships, will turn his attention increasingly toward U-boat warfare and the Eastern Front. Surface raiders will no longer roam the Atlantic with the same confidence. The myth of invulnerability has drowned. Yet for the British, victory carries a somber weight. The loss of HMS Hood still hangs heavy. More than 1,400 sailors remain entombed beneath the waves. The destruction of Bismarck feels less like triumph and more like equilibrium restored. As Dorsetshire steams away, the oil slick begins to disperse. Wind pushes it into thin streaks. Debris sinks gradually, piece by piece. The Atlantic erases evidence with indifferent patience. By afternoon, only faint traces remain. A patch of floating wood, a helmet, a silent stretch of ocean where steel once ruled. Far above, gulls circle briefly before moving on. The sea returns to its endless rhythm. But somewhere beneath those cold, shifting waters lies a shattered hull, resting upright on the ocean floor, nearly 3 miles down. A monument to pride, and to a single torpedo dropped from a fabric biplane. May 27, 1941. 1840 hours. Reich Chancellery, Berlin. The room is silent, except for the faint rustle of paper. Grand Admiral Erich Raeder stands rigid before a long oak table. The message from Naval Command rests open in his hand, its language precise, clinical, impossible to soften. Bismarck sunk after engagement with superior British forces. Survivors minimal. Across the table, Adolf Hitler reads the duplicate copy without expression. For several seconds, there's only the ticking of a clock mounted high on the wall. The pride of the Kriegsmarine is gone. The room smells faintly of cigarette smoke and polished wood. Outside, Berlin moves through an ordinary evening, unaware that a symbol of national resurgence has just slipped beneath the Atlantic. Raeder begins to speak, outlining the sequence. Torpedo damage to steering gear. Loss of maneuverability. Engagement by multiple enemy capital ships. Overwhelming firepower. Hitler interrupts with a single question. How? Raeder answers carefully. A British carrier aircraft. A torpedo strike aft. Steering jammed. A biplane. The detail lingers in the air like an insult. For years, German naval planners have invested in heavy surface units. Scharnhorst, Gneisenau, Tirpitz. Battleships meant to project power, to threaten convoys, to challenge Britain's command of the sea. Bismarck was the embodiment of that doctrine. Massive armor belts. Advanced fire control. A statement in steel. And she was crippled by an aircraft whose design would have looked outdated in 1935. Hitler's expression hardens. His faith in surface raiders, already strained by the risks they carry, fractures further. The Atlantic is not a dueling ground for battleships. It is a hunting ground for submarines. The strategic shift begins in that room. Orders will soon follow, emphasizing U-boat expansion under Admiral Karl Donitz. Resources will flow towards submarine production. Surface fleets will be used cautiously, almost reluctantly. Tirpitz will spend much of the war in Norwegian fjords, a threat in being rather than a roaming predator, far from Berlin, in Brest and Lorient. U-boat commanders read the news with mixed emotion. The destruction of Bismarck proves British naval coordination is formidable. Carrier aircraft, radar, concentrated battle groups. The Atlantic is tightening, but it also confirms something else. Battleships can be hunted. In London, Winston Churchill receives confirmation late in the evening. He has followed the pursuit hour by hour, aware of how close Bismarck came to sanctuary in occupied France. When the final signal arrives, he exhales slowly. The loss of Hood demanded resolution. The Bismarck is sunk, he tells colleagues simply. There is no cheering in the War Cabinet room, only relief. The Royal Navy has preserved its credibility. The Atlantic lifeline remains contested but intact. Back on the ocean floor, Bismarck settles into silt nearly 4,800 meters below the surface. Her hull, though shattered above the waterline, remains largely intact below. The great swastika once painted on her forecastle lies hidden in darkness. Steel that symbolized ambition now rests in cold obscurity. For the families of over 2,000 German sailors, telegrams begin arriving within days. Formal language, expressions of honor and sacrifice, the weight of loss delivered in ink. In Portsmouth and Plymouth, British families who lost sons aboard could feel something complex and quiet. Justice, perhaps, but not restoration. Nothing brings Hood back. The Atlantic war does not pause. Convoys continue to assemble under gray skies. Destroyers zigzag through heavy seas. Sonar operators listening for the faint echo of submarines. Merchant crews scan horizons for periscopes and aircraft alike. Yet the destruction of Bismarck alters perception. It proves that even the most formidable battleship is vulnerable to coordinated air and sea power. The era of unquestioned dominance by big gun ships is fading. Aircraft carriers and submarines are redefining naval warfare. And at the center of that shift is a fragile biplane that should not have mattered. A ferry Swordfish, fabric wings, open cockpit, a single torpedo slung beneath its belly. History rarely announces its turning points. It disguises them in moments that seem improbable. A storm over the Atlantic, a slow-moving aircraft braving flak, a rudder jammed at 12 degrees. From arrogance to defeat, the transformation took less than 48 hours, but its consequences would ripple across every ocean for the rest of the war. May 26, 1941, 23:30 hours. Aboard HMS Ark Royal, returning to position. The first Swordfish limps back through cloud and darkness, engine uneven, fabric torn along the lower wing. Deck crews scramble into place as the aircraft approaches at little more than stall speed. There are no landing lights blazing, only shielded lamps and hand signals. The biplane drops onto the pitching deck, tailhook catching the arrestor wire with a violent jolt. The crew climbs out stiffly, faces raw from windburn, eyes wide. They do not yet know the scale of what they have done. The ferry Swordfish is not an aircraft that inspires confidence on paper. Introduced in the mid-1930s, it is constructed of metal frame and fabric covering, with fixed landing gear and open cockpits. Its top speed barely exceeds 130 knots. Against modern fighters, it is almost defenseless. German naval planners considered such aircraft obsolete, yet the Swordfish possesses traits that do not show on performance charts. Stability at low speeds, exceptional handling in foul weather, the ability to carry a torpedo accurately at wave-top height. On Ark Royal's bridge, Captain Cedric Holland receives fragmentary reports. 1 torpedo hit claimed, possibly 2, steering damage suspected. He allows himself no outward celebration. The Atlantic night conceals too much uncertainty. Bismarck may still reach Brest, but as dawn reveals the crippled German battleship circling helplessly, Realization spreads quietly through the carrier's corridors. The strike worked. The squadron responsible, 810 and 818 Naval Air Squadrons, consisted largely of young pilots and observers who trained in peacetime conditions, practicing torpedo drops against simulated targets. Few had faced the concentrated anti-aircraft fire of a modern battleship. They flew anyway. Lieutenant John Moffett, one of the pilots credited with a decisive torpedo strike, later described the approach as surreal. The wall of flak seemed impenetrable, yet the very slowness of the Swordfish complicated German gunnery solutions. Fire control systems designed to predict high-speed targets struggled with aircraft moving at little more than 90 knots during their attack run. Speed can be an advantage, so can being underestimated. As Bismarck fought for survival, the following morning, Ark Royal maintained distance, ready to launch additional strikes if necessary. They would not be required. The rudder damage sealed the outcome. Naval analysts would later dissect the engagement with meticulous care. The torpedo did not shatter the hull or ignite magazines. It struck near the stern, jamming the rudder assembly and damaging steering machinery beyond immediate repair. The result was not dramatic destruction. It was immobilization. In modern naval warfare, maneuverability equals life. Without it, even the most heavily armored ship becomes a target. The British attack demonstrated the integrated power of carrier aviation combined with surface fleets. Radar tracking, coordinated pursuit, air-delivered torpedoes shaping the battlefield for battleships to finish the task. Across Europe, military observers took note. In Italy and Japan, naval planners studied reports closely. The lesson was clear. Capital ships operating without adequate air cover were vulnerable, regardless of armor thickness. The Swordfish itself would continue to serve throughout the war, flying from carriers and even merchant vessels converted into escort carriers. It would attack submarines, surface raiders, and convoys in Arctic darkness. Its crews endured exposure and extreme risk. Casualty rates were high, yet its legacy would forever be tied to a single night in May 1941, a night when outdated design met modern ambition, when fabric and wire confronted hardened steel. The image remained striking, a slow-moving biplane descending through storm clouds toward one of the most powerful warships afloat, anti-aircraft fire exploding around it, the pilot holding steady because turning away would mean failure. War does not always reward the largest machine or the newest weapon. Sometimes it favors adaptability, coordination, and courage executed at precisely the right moment. As Ark Royal steamed westward after sinking, her deck crew secured aircraft and washed away oil and salt from wooden planks. Routine resumed. Meals served. Watches rotated. But beneath the ordinary rhythm lingered awareness. They had changed something fundamental. The age of the lone battleship dominating the sea had suffered a fatal wound, and it was delivered not by another Leviathan, but by a biplane that most adversaries dismissed with a glance. June 1989, North Atlantic, approximately 600 miles west of Brest. The ocean is calm on the surface. Nearly 3 miles below, in absolute darkness, a remotely operated vehicle descends through layers of black water. Its floodlights pierce nothing at first. Only drifting particles, suspended like dust in an abandoned cathedral. Then steel emerges from shadow. The bow of Bismarck rises from the seabed, startlingly intact. Decades have passed since May 1941. Empires have fallen. Germany has been divided and reunited. The war that consumed continents now lives in archives and memory. Yet here, beneath crushing pressure, the battleship rests as if still on patrol. The expedition, led by ocean explorer Robert Ballard, approaches cautiously. Cameras pan across the hull. The massive anchor remains in place. The swastika once painted on the forecastle has long since faded beneath corrosion and marine growth. The superstructure tells a different story. Damage from British shell fire is visible. Sections are torn open, turret housing scarred. But there is no evidence of a catastrophic internal explosion. No massive breach from below that would suggest a magazine detonation. The wreck settles upright, embedded slightly in soft sediment. For decades, debates surrounded the final moments of Bismarck. Did British torpedoes alone send her down? Or did German scuttling charges hasten the end? The evidence on the seabed suggests a combination. Shellfire devastated the upper works. Torpedoes compounded the flooding. But internal scuttling accelerated the inevitable. The ship was beaten, then deliberately consigned to the sea by her own crew. The discovery reframes the narrative not as simple destruction, but as controlled defiance amid defeat. Cameras glide past the enormous 15-inch gun barrels of turrets Anton and Bruno. They are silent now, pointed slightly off-center, frozen in their last mechanical positions. Marine life clings to the steel. Time has softened edges but not erased scale. Inside the broken superstructure, darkness conceals corridors where sailors once ran with damage reports. The bridge, shattered in 1941, lies collapsed. Somewhere within that debris, Captain Ernst Lindemann made his final stand. The Atlantic has preserved their gravesite with indifferent care. Back on the surface in 1989, researchers monitor grainy black and white screens. Every frame carries weight. This is not treasure hunting. It is documentation, confirmation, closure. Ballard makes it clear that the site is a war grave. No artifacts are removed. No intrusion beyond observation. Respect governs exploration. For historians, the wreck answers technical questions. The torpedo that jammed the rudder struck precisely where British accounts suggested. Damage patterns align with survivor testimony. The final plunge occurred after progressive flooding and structural failure, not a single dramatic blast. For families, the images carry deeper resonance. The ship that vanished in smoke and chaos is now visible, resting in solemn stillness. The Atlantic that once roared with artillery fire now holds quiet vigil. Modern naval doctrine has evolved far beyond the gunnery duels of 1941. Aircraft carriers project power across continents. Guided missiles travel faster than sound. Submarines operate with near invisibility. Yet the lessons of Bismarck endure. Concentrated air power can cripple even the strongest surface combatant. Coordination between fleet elements determines survival. Overconfidence invites vulnerability. And technology alone does not guarantee supremacy. In training academies from Annapolis to Kiel, the case study of Bismarck remains relevant, not as myth, but as analysis, strategic miscalculation, operational bravery, tactical innovation. The Swordfish, too, occupies its place in museums and memory. Restored examples sit under hangar lights. Fabric wings taught once more. Visitors often pause, surprised by how small it appears, how improbable. But history does not measure impact by appearance. Down in the cold abyss, Bismarck's hull continues to rust slowly. Bacteria feed on iron. Over centuries, steel will thin, collapse, merge with sediment. The outline of the ship will blur. Yet the story will persist. A storm, a torpedo, a circle in the Atlantic, and the moment when arrogance met vulnerability under gray skies. May 1941 did not end the war at sea. It did something more subtle. It shifted belief. In the weeks after Bismarck's sinking, convoy routes across the North Atlantic remained contested. U-boats continued their silent hunt, wolf packs assembling beneath moonless skies. Merchant ships still burned. Sailors still vanished into freezing water. But something fundamental had changed in how naval power was understood. Before Bismarck sailed, she represented a doctrine rooted in prestige. Massive surface combatants, armored and heavily gunned, were symbols of national strength. They projected intimidation as much as firepower. When Bismarck destroyed HMS Hood, that doctrine appeared vindicated. A single engagement had erased one of Britain's most storied warships in minutes. Shock reverberated through London. Confidence wavered. Yet within 48 hours, the narrative inverted. The same battleship that seemed unstoppable was first shadowed, then harassed, then crippled by aircraft operating from a carrier far beyond the horizon. The decisive blow did not come from a rival Leviathan meeting her broadside to broadside. It came from coordination. Carrier aircraft located and slowed her. Battleships finished the work. Cruisers delivered torpedoes. Destroyers stood ready to press the attack through the night. It was layered warfare, integrated and relentless. For Germany, the implications were stark. Surface raiders could inflict damage, but they could not roam freely against an enemy able to combine radar, aviation, and concentrated fleet action. Tirpitz, Bismarck's sister ship, would spend most of her operational life in Norwegian fjords, tying down Allied resources but rarely venturing into open Atlantic combat. The psychological effect outweighed even the material loss. The Kriegsmarine's aura of rising dominance fractured. In its place came caution. Submarine warfare intensified, but the era of grand battleship challenges in the Atlantic was effectively over. For Britain, the victory restored equilibrium. The destruction of Hood had shaken national morale. Churchill understood symbolism. The sinking of Bismarck provided a counterweight. It demonstrated that even after catastrophic loss, the Royal Navy retained cohesion and reach. Yet beneath strategic analysis lies something more human. More than 2,000 German sailors did not return home. Over 1,400 British sailors aboard Hood had already met the same fate. Steel clashed. Strategy evolved. But the sea claimed individuals. Mechanics, signalmen, gunners, young officers who had trained in peacetime, believing war might never come. The Atlantic kept them all. The ferry Swordfish that delivered the critical torpedo was not glamorous. Its fabric skin and exposed cockpit spoke of another era. Yet its crew pressed forward into flak and storm because orders required it. Their success did not depend on superiority in speed or armor. It depended on timing, precision, and nerve. That is the enduring image. Not merely a battleship sinking, but a confrontation between perception and reality. Bismarck embodied confidence, engineering excellence, and national ambition. The Swordfish embodied improvisation and persistence. When the torpedo struck and the rudder jammed, arrogance yielded to vulnerability. Modern warfare continues to evolve. Hypersonic missiles and satellite targeting have replaced manual rangefinders and open cockpits. But the principle remains consistent. No system is invulnerable. No platform immune to disruption. In that sense, the North Atlantic in May 1941 was not just a battleground. It was a classroom. The lesson was harsh. Power without adaptability falters. Dominance without protection invites challenge. And sometimes, history pivots on a machine that appears outdated, flown by men willing to enter a storm others consider unwinnable. Today, when historians examine sonar scans of Bismarck resting in darkness, they see more than twisted metal. They see a moment when naval doctrine recalibrated under fire, when pride confronted coordinated opposition, and failed to adapt quickly enough. From arrogance to defeat, the transition unfolded in less than 2 days. But its impact stretched across oceans and decades. The Atlantic has long since quieted. Convoys no longer zigzag through U-boat-infested waters. The roar of 16-inch guns has faded into archives and documentaries. Yet beneath those gray waves lies a reminder. Steel can sink, legends can fracture, and sometimes a weapon that changes the course of war arrives slowly, wings trembling in the wind.